Hi guys and welcome back again. So I've just amended the stereo mix for some of the other sounds, just made some of the other sounds mono. Let's just bring this in and out so we can see where we're at. So this is the advantage of doing it like this on a kind of row of the mixer, because it means you can quickly bypass them in and out. So it does sound quite nice with the processing out. It's nice and wide, but it's a little bit messy sounding, I think. And although when I bring it in, it maybe sounds a little bit kind of flatter in some ways, I think once we introduce spatial processing later, reverbs and any reflections and stuff like that, we're going to end up actually filling, kind of re-injecting a little bit of that life. It definitely sounds clearer with the processing in, and the disco loop is really prominent. Yeah, definitely more front back perspective, which is what I was going for. Okay, so in this video, we're going to start looking at EQ. Now, EQ, again, is another way that we can affect the kind of space of the mix, which is a lot of what we're doing here, is kind of trying to sculpt space within the mix that we're then going to fill out with spatial effects. So without creating space in the first place, so what a lot of people do is they just throw reverbs and delays on things. But if you don't actually create the space in the first place, then there's nowhere for the reverb to exist, so it ends up becoming very kind of mushy very quickly. So what we try and do is create space within the mix, and EQ is another way of doing that. It's also a way of carving out frequencies, so we can basically have less overlap and more separation between the elements. It allows us to create a mix which has good height to it, so it kind of helps us stretch up the high frequencies and push down the low frequencies, and generally allows us to increase the clarity. Now I'm going to start off with some of the drum sounds. Start with the kick drum here. I use Pro Q3 from FabFilter generally. Sometimes I use more of the kind of vintage EQ emulations, and I'm sure I'll use some of those later down the line, things like SSL, and sometimes I'll actually use just SSL EQs. But for a track like this, I would use Pro Q3 because I don't really want it to be, I want it to be a club kind of a current sounding track. So I'm just going to go digital, and this is such an easy EQ to use that even when I kind of might consider using just vintage like mixer kind of EQs, like just an SSL mix or whatever, I often just end up using Pro Q3 because I'm so used to using it and it's so easy to use. So, okay, kick drum. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little low cut to just shave off some of the low frequencies, not too high because kick drums generally have a subharmonic an octave lower, and I don't want to eat into that. So that's where the fundamental is, around here. So around 25, there'll be actually a subharmonic. So I don't usually cut into that. Now there's also often a boxy frequency in the low mids. And then it's nice to sometimes just bring out a little bit of a kind of attack of the kick drum. It's not always necessary, but around 800 to 2K, you usually find a nice attack area. Let's try a little bit of a roll off. Now, anytime we can shave off low and high frequencies, we're going to be creating extra clarity in those areas for the sounds that we want to be nice and present in there. So for the high frequencies, we want that shaker sound, the ride cymbals, top part of the disco loop to be really nice and represented up here. So we can shave off some frequencies from other sounds. That's always good. This is interesting because when we bring this EQ in, it feels like the kick drum sinks a little bit in the mix. It goes a little bit lower, which makes sense because we're not touching the low frequencies, but we're taking away a little bit of a low mid area, got a little boost in the attack portion and taking away the top, which means that, especially this little dip here, means that suddenly we're kind of just pushing these low frequencies down a little bit and creating a little separation between the attack and the kind of low portion of the kick, the sustain of the kick. Okay, I like the sound of that, so let's push on through. So let's do a snare EQ as well. So often I use bells and low shelves rather than low cuts, which seem to have a better result actually, a bit more natural sounding than using a straight up low cut. Okay, so for the snare we can bring out a little bit of the fundamental. Then often there's a kind of an area around 500 on the snare which can be good to cut. And then maybe a little 2K boost on the snare is often quite nice. And let's see if we can shave off some of the highs. We can be quite drastic with our slopes on things like drums because they're static in terms of their pitch. Yeah, again, just creating little pockets for the snare in that case. Let's have a look at this clap sound. Okay, so again I'll do a bell shape and a little low shelf. Now the claps I like to bring out a kind of 1K area. I often seem to find sounds good on claps. Now notice how I'm doing this alongside the other sounds, and that's deliberate because I don't want to get the sound to sound good in solo. I want it to sound good with all the other sounds. So it's very important to do that. Sometimes I'll do it in solo because I need to demonstrate something, especially when it comes onto these loops here, but generally I like to do it with the other sounds playing. Okay, so the 909 is not playing there. Okay, so I'm soloing this one, but bring it back in. Triangle's a bit loud. Now, generally I'm doing filtering EQ at the moment, so I'm doing cutting away of frequencies rather than boosting. But on the drums, I do tend to do a little bit more boosting. And often on the more sustaining sounds, I'll do the boosting post-compression. But I find with the drums, you can kind of get the frequencies nice and dialed in and then use the compressor to kind of pump those frequencies and make them a bit more vibrant. So that's generally how I do it with drums. Sometimes I EQ after the compression, but often I'll EQ boosts and cuts pre-compression. So this is the shaker sound. I might just see if there's any frequencies I can roll off on the top of this shaker. I can even do a little boost around the kind of roll off point. So I'm replacing some really kind of inaudible high frequencies with some more audible lower high frequencies. Maybe bringing in a little bit of harshness. I might take that out. Yeah, I don't think that's actually doing anything good, so I'm going to take that out. Okay, so let's have a look at some of these disco loops. Now these might need to be soloed first of all, just so I can hear what's going on. I'm going to do quite a drastic cut on here. Okay, let's try that in the mix. I might do a little roll off on the top here. And likewise on this one, because I don't want these disco loops. These are meant to be kind of sitting behind a little bit, and I want to make sure that the shaker and some of the other high frequency sounds have got this area up here kind of to themselves. Okay, so this one, it's got a lot of low frequencies in it. So for this one, I'm going to do quite a big shelf here, or bell, and then alongside a shelf to get quite a drastic low frequency cut here. Let's change the slope there slightly. Now this one I might just do a little bit of a high shelf and maybe a little dip in the mid-range here. I want this one just to be a little bit brighter and come through a little bit more. Maybe even a little boost just above the area I'm cutting. Now, for these sounds here, there's an argument to say I could do it in linear phase mode because it's quite complex material with lots of frequencies in there. So actually linear phase might be a little bit better, which generally works better on sounds that cross a lot of frequencies. Okay, let's try that one. Once again, a few lows in here. So I don't want these to interfere with the kick drum. So again, I like this combination of low shelf and bell rather than just doing a low cut, which this is a bit more musical sounding. Okay, like that. There's a perk sound here. So once again, ding, low cut. Don't want anything interfering with the kick drum down here around 50 Hertz area. So you can hear this shaker, just got a ton of low frequencies in there. I'm actually going to use a low cut on this because I really just want to get rid of those. I said a ton of low frequencies. It's pretty quiet, but that sound really has no need to have low frequencies in it, so I am going to be quite drastic there. Okay, so we've got a few sounds dialed in. Let's see where we're at with the EQ. So that's doing a really nice job on these drums at opening out and making the mix a little bit taller. So here, without the processing, it's a little bit boxed in. And with these EQs in, it suddenly stretches up a little bit. So we've got a little bit more of a sheen on the tops. The bottoms feel a little bit lower. Now we're going to continue on this EQ process in the next video. So I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.